It was just another quiet morning in the suburban neighborhood where Sam had lived for the past 5 years. The sun was barely up, casting a golden glow over the rows of neatly manicured lawns and pristine white fences. Sam had just brewed his first cup of coffee when he noticed a strange movement at the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was nothing more than a bird or a neighbor walking by, but as his gaze focused, he saw a dark figure standing at the base of his backyard fence. The figure was tall, wearing a uniform that Sam didn't immediately recognize. The morning chill made the man's posture stiff, but his purpose was unmistakable. He was inspecting the fence. Sam's heart skipped a beat. Why was an HOA officer here so early in the morning? They were usually more formal, scheduled visits, not this shadowy, surprise appearance. Sam's curiosity piqued, and he quietly placed his coffee cup on the counter, slipping out the back door without making a sound. He crept toward the fence, trying to make sense of what was happening. The officer, seemingly unaware, was taking notes on a clipboard while pacing around the boundary, eyes scanning every inch of the structure. Then, something happened that made Sam's stomach tighten with unease. Without warning, the officer stepped back, then jumped. He vaulted effortlessly over the fence, landing gracefully on the other side. Sam stood frozen, staring in disbelief. What kind of inspection involved jumping over someone's fence like that? A sense of panic washed over him. Sam had spent years building the fence, putting in time, effort, and even some of his own money to create a small, private oasis in his backyard. The fence wasn't just a boundary. It was a symbol of his home, of his peace and privacy. To see an officer treating it like an obstacle to be cleared was unsettling, almost intrusive. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the officer's boots crunching against the gravel. The man was now moving toward the far side of the yard, still scribbling something on his clipboard. Sam's instincts screamed at him to confront the officer, but he hesitated. Why was the officer here? Was there a complaint? Had he violated some obscure HOA rule without knowing? Sam's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The HOA had always been strict about regulations, but this felt like more than just a routine check. The officer wasn't acting like someone simply enforcing a rule. He was acting as though he had authority over something more personal. With a deep breath, Sam took a step forward, ready to approach the officer and ask what was going on. But before he could get any closer, the officer abruptly turned and headed toward the gate. Had he seen Sam? Sam quickly ducked behind a tree, holding his breath. The officer paused at the gate, glancing briefly at the yard, and then, without a word, left. Sam stood there, heart pounding in his chest. The officer's behavior was strange. Why had he jumped the fence? What was he writing down? And why hadn't he said anything to Sam? The uncertainty gnawed at Sam as he stood motionless in the early morning light. The officer was gone, but Sam's sense of dread lingered. As he walked back to the house, he glanced at the fence, now appearing even more vulnerable than before. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his wife's voice from inside, calling for him to come in. But Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This was only the beginning. Little did he know, this unexpected visit would soon escalate into a full-blown confrontation with the HOA, and lead him straight into his grandpa's unexpected and wildly unconventional solution. By the time Sam stepped back inside, the unsettling feeling hadn't left him. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself that maybe he was overthinking things, but the thought of the officer jumping over his fence kept creeping back into his mind. It felt like an invasion of his personal space, something he wasn't ready to confront. Still, he tried to focus on his day. That was until the envelope arrived. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that Sam saw the letter. It was slipped under the door, the HOA's official logo stamped in bold black on the top right corner. He stared at it for a long moment. The words "Notice of Violation" on the front sending a wave of dread coursing through his chest. He had never been the kind of person to break rules. At least, not in any way that would get the HOA involved. His fingers shook slightly as he tore open the envelope, the paper inside crisp and formal. Sam skimmed through the text, but as his eyes landed on the key part, his heart sank. It has come to our attention that the fence located at your property line exceeds the maximum height allowable under community guidelines. Effective immediately, we require that the fence be reduced to the required height of 6 feet. Failure to comply will result in fines and possible further action. Sam blinked, rereading the lines. 6 feet. His fence was just over 6 feet tall at certain points, but it had been built with care, within the boundaries of what he thought were acceptable parameters. What had changed? Why was the HOA suddenly so aggressive? And then it hit him. The officer had been taking notes. He had been scouting, preparing for this very moment. The cold rush of realization swept through Sam. The HOA officer wasn't here by accident. He had been sent. His frustration bubbled to the surface as he paced the kitchen. Sam's mind raced. Could it be that the HOA was now targeting his property for some reason? Was there a personal vendetta behind this? He had heard stories of overly zealous officers in other neighborhoods, but he never thought it could happen to him. In the midst of his growing anger, his phone buzzed. It was his grandpa. "Hey, Sam, heard about the letter." Grandpa's voice rang out, as if he had known about it long before Sam had even opened the envelope. "I'm coming over. We need to talk." Sam felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Grandpa always seemed to know what was going on, and his advice was usually solid. But this time, something felt different. What could Grandpa possibly know about this situation? When Grandpa arrived, he didn't waste any time. His eyes were sharp, his posture still upright despite his age. Without even asking about the details, he started pacing around the living room. "This isn't just about your fence, Sam," he said, his voice lowering, as though imparting some kind of secret. "The HOA's getting bolder. They're not just targeting fences, they're testing us." Sam frowned. "Testing us? What do you mean?" Grandpa stopped and looked directly at him, his eyes gleaming with a knowing intensity. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's making a power play. They're not just enforcing rules, Sam. They're trying to assert control. But I've dealt with people like this before." Sam was still processing the words when Grandpa dropped a bombshell. "I've got a plan. A big one. We're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." The suddenness of the statement caught Sam off guard. Grandpa's eyes were twinkling, as if he already had something outrageous in mind. And in that moment, Sam realized that his grandpa wasn't just concerned about a fence. He was about something much bigger. "All right, Grandpa," Sam said, his voice tinged with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "What's your plan?" Grandpa leaned in, his voice lowering even further. "We're going to make sure that officer and the HOA know exactly who they're dealing with. It's time to make a statement." Sam's mind was racing, still unsure of what kind of plan his grandpa had in mind. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about standing up, about making sure the HOA didn't get away with overstepping their bounds. Sam wasn't sure where this was headed, but if Grandpa was involved, it was going to be anything but ordinary. As Grandpa continued to explain his plan in cryptic detail, Sam couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement mixed with dread. Whatever was coming, it was going to be big, and he had no idea just how far his grandpa was willing to go. The evening air was heavy with anticipation as Sam followed Grandpa into the garage. It smelled faintly of oil and sawdust, old, familiar smells that Sam had always associated with his grandpa's endless projects. Grandpa's hands moved swiftly over an assortment of tools, papers, and strange gadgets laid out on the workbench. Sam had never seen his grandpa this focused, his mind clearly in motion as he pulled out an old map of the backyard and spread it across the table. "All right, Sam," Grandpa said with a sly grin. "Let's get one thing straight. This isn't about just some silly fence. This is about something much bigger. The HOA thinks they can walk all over us because we follow the rules, but they're about to learn that we're not just any homeowners." Sam stared at the map, trying to piece together what Grandpa was getting at. So, what exactly are we doing here? Are we just going to argue with them? Because I'm not sure that'll change anything. Grandpa chuckled darkly. Oh, Sam, you've got it all wrong. The HOA doesn't get the privilege of just enforcing their ridiculous rules. We're going to make sure they never mess with us again. Sam couldn't help but laugh nervously. What do you mean, Grandpa? How are we supposed to make them back off? Grandpa leaned in close, lowering his voice to a near whisper. We're going to show them how it feels to be on the receiving end of a power play. You see, the HOA's not just about following rules. They want control. But control is a game, and we're going to change the rules. We'll turn the tables so fast, they won't know what hit them. Sam furrowed his brow, still not entirely understanding. Okay, so, what's the plan? Grandpa's eyes twinkled as he pulled out a box from beneath the table. It was old and worn, like something from a forgotten time, with rusted latches that creaked as he opened it. Inside were a collection of tools, wires, and strange devices that made Sam's stomach churn with uncertainty. He wasn't sure whether to be excited or horrified. We're going to make sure the HOA officer's visit is one he'll never forget, Grandpa said, his voice filled with excitement. Remember how he jumped over your fence earlier? Well, we're going to take full advantage of that. We've got pranks, but these aren't your average pranks. They're the kind that leave a mark. We'll make sure he knows what it feels like to be caught off guard. And by the time he's done with our yard, he'll never want to mess with us again. Sam's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what his grandpa was suggesting. Wait, are you saying we're going to prank him? The HOA officer? Grandpa nodded enthusiastically. That's right. But not just any prank. We'll rig your fence and backyard with a series of harmless, but thoroughly embarrassing traps. The kind that will leave him so flustered, he'll forget all about his official duties. Sam wasn't sure whether to laugh or be nervous. This sounded like something out of a movie. But Grandpa's confidence was infectious, and Sam found himself nodding along. What kind of traps? Sam asked, his curiosity piqued. Grandpa pointed at the map. We'll start with something simple. First, when he climbs over the fence again, we'll trigger a loud, high-pitched noise, one that'll make his ears ring. Then we'll have paint-filled balloons suspended just above the fence. As soon as he's distracted by the noise, those balloons will drop right onto him. After that, a few ropes will be triggered to tangle him up. The goal is to disarm him, make him look ridiculous, and most importantly, send a message. You don't mess with us. Sam's jaw dropped. Grandpa, this sounds insane. What if he calls the cops or... Grandpa raised a hand, silencing him. Trust me, Sam. No one is going to call the cops. The officer is going to be so caught off guard that he won't know what hit him. Besides, it's all harmless. He'll be embarrassed, but that's it. And once he's done, he won't come back without thinking twice. Sam was beginning to get excited. The absurdity of the plan seemed to fade as Grandpa spoke, and the idea of teaching the officer a lesson started to feel like the right thing to do. If the HOA could intrude like this, why shouldn't they face the consequences? So when do we start? Sam asked, the excitement bubbling in his chest. Grandpa grinned, a gleam in his eye. Tomorrow. And Sam, get ready, because this is going to be a show. As Grandpa continued to explain the finer details of his plan, Sam felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was their chance to turn the tables on the HOA. And no one, not even the officer, would see it coming. Tomorrow, things would get interesting. The following morning, Sam found himself pacing around his backyard, inspecting every inch of his fence. Grandpa had spent the night preparing all the necessary tools and materials, leaving Sam with the task of setting up the traps. The air was crisp and filled with a sense of anticipation. The sun was barely over the horizon, casting long shadows on the ground, as Sam walked around with a mixture of anxiety and excitement. Grandpa had already mapped out everything the night before. the paint-filled balloons, the ropes, the hidden triggers, and a high-pitched noise system that would make the officer's ears ring. Sam hadn't expected to be part of such an elaborate plan, but now that it was all in motion, he couldn't back out. It was too late. This had become personal, more than just a harmless prank. It was a message, a way to show the HOA that they couldn't just trample over people's lives and privacy without consequences. Sam's hands trembled as he carefully positioned the first balloon above the fence, the brightly colored plastic shimmering in the morning light. He made sure it was tied in place, just a few inches out of sight, so it wouldn't be easily noticed. The setup was intricate, and Grandpa had been surprisingly thorough in his instructions. The high-pitched noise system was the most complicated part. Grandpa had rigged it with a motion sensor that would activate the moment the officer crossed a certain point in the yard. Sam set it up carefully, ensuring it was hidden in the bushes. This was the moment of no return. After a few hours of preparation, the traps were in place, and Sam was exhausted. He wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. The fence now looked even more fortified than before, yet with hidden surprises lying in wait. All they needed now was for the HOA officer to arrive. At exactly 11 o'clock a.m., Sam's phone buzzed. It was a message from his grandpa. "Get ready. He's coming." Sam's heart skipped a beat. The officer was on his way. He could already hear the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. Grandpa's plan was about to unfold. Sam quickly ran inside to check on the time. But when he glanced out the window, his eyes widened. There he was. The HOA officer appeared again, walking up to the gate, clipboard in hand, exactly as he had the day before. He was wearing the same stiff uniform, looking as serious as ever. He didn't know what was waiting for him. Sam's nerves kicked into overdrive. He glanced at the fence, the carefully positioned triggers, and the concealed paint-filled balloons, now ready to unleash chaos. His hand gripped the windowsill as he watched the officer move toward the yard with determination. There was no turning back now. He watched as the officer hesitated at the base of the fence. His eyes scanned the yard, just as he had the day before, but this time, there was a hint of uncertainty in the officer's movements. Sam's pulse quickened. The officer reached out, hand brushing the fence. The first step had begun. He took a deep breath, and then vaulted over the fence, just as he had the day before. Sam held his breath. The officer was now in the yard. The motion sensor was live. Suddenly, the high-pitched sound blasted through the air, sharp and piercing. The officer froze, looking around in confusion. Sam's stomach twisted with a mix of guilt and excitement. This was it. The officer had no idea what was coming. Just as the officer covered his ears, trying to shield himself from the noise, the first paint balloon dropped, bursting in a spectacular shower of bright red and blue. The officer stumbled backward in shock, his hands flailing, his face covered in paint. Sam gasped. The sight was absurd, almost comical, but he couldn't let himself laugh. There was more to come. The motion sensor triggered the next part of the trap, a series of ropes tied to tree branches just above the officer's head. As he tried to retreat, the ropes tangled around his legs, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Sam's heart pounded as the officer lay on the grass, struggling to free himself from the ropes. He had no idea what hit him. Sam peeked out from behind the window, his hands trembling with excitement. The officer was completely disoriented. He looked like a clown, covered in paint, tripping over the ropes, trying to figure out what had just happened. But the best part was yet to come. Just then, Sam heard his grandpa's voice behind him. "That's just the warm-up, Sam. The real fun begins now." Sam turned, his eyes wide with anticipation. Grandpa was grinning. His eyes filled with mischief. "What do you mean?" Sam asked. Grandpa winked. "Wait for it." At that moment, the sound of a car engine roared to life. Sam turned just in time to see a second car pull into the driveway. The HOA's main office vehicle, clearly responding to the officer's distress. Sam's stomach dropped. Grandpa hadn't just pranked the officer. He'd drawn the whole HOA into this mess, and the show was only just beginning. Sam stood frozen by the window, watching as the HOA's main office vehicle came to a stop in front of his house. The officer, still struggling to free himself from the tangled ropes, was now drenched in paint, his face a mix of confusion and frustration. Sam couldn't help but feel a small wave of guilt, but it quickly dissolved into disbelief. What had Grandpa gotten them into? The second car, a sleek black SUV with the HOA's logo emblazoned on the side, parked next to the officer's van. A man in a sharp suit stepped out, his face a picture of authority. His expression was grim, clearly not amused by the sight before him. Grandpa's eyes gleamed with mischief as he nudged Sam, his grin widening. "Looks like the cavalry's here. Watch and learn, Sam. This is how you take control of the situation." Sam swallowed nervously. This was getting out of hand. The last thing he expected was a whole HOA team showing up. Was this the end of their plan, or was Grandpa truly prepared for what came next? The suited man, who Sam assumed was the HOA manager, strode toward the officer, his eyes darting over the scene of mayhem in the backyard. The officer finally managed to untangle himself from the ropes, but he was still covered in paint, his uniform a mess. He looked at the manager helplessly, his face flushed with embarrassment. "What the hell happened here, Johnson?" The HOA manager barked, his voice sharp. The officer, clearly humiliated, tried to regain his composure. I don't know, sir. One moment, I was inspecting the fence, and then..." He paused, trying to find the right words, but it was clear he had no explanation. The manager sighed and turned to the backyard, scanning the traps that were still in place. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of prank?" Before the officer could answer, the high-pitched noise system kicked in again, blasting through the yard. The manager winced, his hand flying up to shield his ears. Sam's heart raced as he realized Grandpa had set the system on a timer. The officer, still dazed and covered in paint, staggered back in confusion. "Is this how you enforce rules in this neighborhood?" The manager snapped, glaring at the officer. But his eyes weren't just focused on the officer now. His gaze drifted toward the house, where Sam was still watching from the window. The man's eyes narrowed. Sam's stomach dropped. Had he been spotted? "Johnson," the manager said, his voice suddenly cold, "go to the front door. I'll handle this." The officer, still shaken, nodded and walked toward the front of the house, disappearing from view. Grandpa, however, was still smiling, unfazed by the growing tension. "Don't worry, Sam. They're here for a reason. Now it's time for the final act." Sam turned to his grandpa, a mix of fear and intrigue in his eyes. "Final act? Grandpa, what are you planning?" Grandpa raised an eyebrow and motioned toward the backyard. The HOA might think they're in control, but what they don't realize is they've already walked into our trap. They think this is a game, but it's far from it. When they least expect it, we're going to show them who's really in charge. Sam was beginning to feel the weight of the situation. It was one thing to prank a single officer. It was another thing entirely to involve the entire HOA. He watched as the manager slowly made his way toward the backyard, looking every bit the part of an enraged HOA executive. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was a battle of wills. As the manager approached the spot where the officer had been tangled in ropes, he froze, his eyes scanning the scene. It was time. The trap Grandpa had set in motion wasn't just for the officer. It was a message to the entire HOA. And Sam was starting to realize that Grandpa wasn't just playing games. He was trying to send a much bigger message. Suddenly, the manager's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his face growing even darker as he read the message. His gaze flickered back toward the house. Sam could see the realization dawn on him. They had been played. Grandpa stepped forward, his voice calm yet laced with an undeniable authority. "You're not here to fix the fence, are you?" he said, his tone cutting through the tension like a knife. The manager looked up sharply, his mouth tightening into a thin line. "What are you implying, old man?" Grandpa smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent chills down Sam's spine. "You came here because you thought you could push us around. But what you didn't know was that this was never just about a fence." Sam stood there, watching in awe as Grandpa turned the situation on its head. The manager, clearly taken aback by Grandpa's confidence, looked around as if assessing whether he was still in control of the situation. But Grandpa's next words hit like a thunderclap. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice ringing out clear and sure. "And I think it's time you understood exactly who you're dealing with." The HOA manager's face twisted with anger, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. Sam could feel it. The power dynamic was shifting. The show was far from over. The tension in the air was thick. Sam stood frozen in place, watching the scene unfold in his backyard. The HOA manager, a man who was used to having the upper hand in every situation, now seemed to be rattled. Grandpa stood calmly in front of him, unshaken by the chaos that had already ensued. The manager's eyes flicked around, taking in the aftermath of the prank. Paint splattered everywhere, ropes tangled in the branches like some bizarre jungle trap. His lips pressed into a thin line, and Sam could see the anger boiling just beneath the surface. But there was something else too, a faint glimmer of uncertainty. Grandpa had caught him off guard, and that was something the manager wasn't used to. "Listen here," the manager growled, stepping forward, his gaze locked onto Grandpa. "You've made your point. But this is unprofessional, and I can assure you, there will be consequences." Grandpa raised an eyebrow, his grin never faltering. "Consequences? What kind of consequences?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. The manager's eyes narrowed. "You think you can get away with this kind of nonsense? We'll take you to court if we have to. You'll pay for the damage to the fence, for the disruption, for the—" "You're missing the point," Grandpa interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through the manager's rant. "This isn't about a fence. It never was. This is about the fact that you think you can come into people's lives, take their money, dictate their property, and bully them into compliance without ever facing any pushback." The manager froze. Sam could feel the weight of Grandpa's words, how they landed like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the fence. It was about the HOA's overreach. And Grandpa wasn't backing down. "I'm not afraid of a lawsuit," Grandpa continued, his voice low and steady. "You think you can intimidate us with threats, but the truth is, the only thing you're really scared of is losing control. And I'm here to show you exactly what it feels like to have it slip through your fingers." Sam's heart raced as the manager looked between him and Grandpa. There was something in his eyes now. Fear, or perhaps realization. He hadn't expected any of this. The manager clenched his fists, clearly trying to regain his composure. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, his voice strained. "I could have you fined, evicted, blacklisted. You'll be nothing." Grandpa's smile grew wider, but there was no humor in it. "Go ahead," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Try, but you'll find that the more you push, the more people like us will push back. The more you tighten your grip, the more the people you control will slip through your fingers." Sam could feel the tension building, the air crackling with the power shift. He had never seen his grandpa like this before. There was no trace of the playful old man who had spent hours tinkering in the garage. Instead, this was someone who was standing his ground, unflinching in the face of authority. Sam's respect for him grew tenfold in that moment. For a long moment, the manager said nothing. His gaze flickered over to the officer, who had finally managed to peel the last of the paint off his uniform. The officer stood there awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the growing confrontation. Finally, the manager took a step back. He exhaled sharply, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "You may have won today," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "But this isn't over. You'll regret this." Grandpa's laugh echoed through the yard, deep and rich. "I'm not worried, but you should be." The manager's jaw tightened, and he looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead, he simply turned on his heel and stormed toward the SUV. "This isn't the last you've heard of us," he muttered under his breath. Sam watched, almost in disbelief, as the manager climbed into the SUV, slammed the door, and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. The officer followed, his head down, clearly humiliated by the whole ordeal. Sam looked at his grandpa, still standing with his arms crossed, his smile fading into a satisfied grin. They had done it. "Well," Grandpa said, finally breaking the silence, "that went better than I expected." Sam let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "I can't believe you just did that." He trailed off, still processing what had just happened. The HOA had come in full force, but Grandpa had stood his ground. And not only had they gotten away with it, they had sent a clear message. Grandpa clapped him on the back. "You'll get used to it, Sam. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even if it means making a little noise along the way." Sam nodded slowly, his heart still racing. "So, what happens now?" Grandpa's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Now, we wait. But I think the HOA will be a lot more careful next time they come poking around. People like them only learn one way." As the two of them stood there, watching the dust settle in the driveway, Sam realized that this wasn't just about one small victory. It was about something much bigger. They had taken a stand, and they had won. The dust had barely settled when Grandpa turned to Sam, his face now wearing a satisfied grin. Sam stood still, absorbing the strange, almost surreal scene. The once intimidating HOA manager and officer had driven off, tails between their legs, leaving behind the chaotic mess of paint, ropes, and tension in the backyard. "Well, that was something," Sam muttered, his voice still thick with disbelief. Grandpa chuckled softly, wiping his hands on his pants. "Something. Sam, that was a statement. But don't get too comfortable. This is far from over. You know as well as I do that the HOA doesn't just forget." Sam's eyes widened. Had they truly won, or was this just the beginning of an even bigger storm? Grandpa was right. HOA officials didn't seem like the type to back down easily, especially not after being humiliated like that. Sam felt a growing unease. He'd seen how the HOA used their power before, and it wasn't always fair. "Do you think they'll come back with reinforcements?" Sam asked cautiously, a sense of dread creeping into his chest. Grandpa sighed, his expression turning serious for the first time in hours. "Oh, they'll be back. But we won't just wait around for them to come knocking." He paused, tapping his finger against his chin thoughtfully. "We need to make sure they understand they can't bully people anymore. We need to take the fight to them." Sam felt a rush of adrenaline. Take the fight to them. The idea sounded dangerous, but also oddly satisfying. What had started as a simple act of revenge for the fence now seemed like a much larger mission. This wasn't just about one small battle anymore. This was about challenging the entire system. Grandpa's eyes gleamed. "We'll need allies. The neighbors, the community, everyone who's been bullied by the HOA. We'll get them on our side. If they think they can just push people around, it's time to show them that we're not alone in this." Sam looked around at the neighborhood, noticing the houses that stood next to theirs, all with pristine, uniform lawns and fences. He had always assumed that everyone was content with the HOA's rules, but now he saw it in a new light. Who else felt like they were being controlled? Who else was silently angry, but afraid to speak up? Sam nodded slowly, the weight of what Grandpa was proposing sinking in. "So, we're going to start a revolt?" he asked, half joking, half serious. Grandpa winked. "Exactly. We're going to let them know that their little kingdom is built on fear, and fear is only effective if you let it control you. I'm not afraid of a few rules, Sam, and neither should you be." Sam's heart raced with excitement. They weren't just going to settle for small victories anymore. Grandpa was right. They had the chance to take back control. The idea of rallying the neighborhood against the HOA felt like something out of a movie. It was the kind of mission that Sam had only dreamed about. But now it was real, and it felt right. "Okay, Grandpa, what do we do first?" Sam asked, his voice full of determination. Grandpa gave him a hearty slap on the back. "First, we gather our allies, talk to the neighbors, find out who's fed up with the rules. Then we start organizing. The more people we have on our side, the stronger our message will be. We'll put pressure on the HOA, legal pressure, public pressure. Let them know they can't get away with this anymore." Sam smiled, feeling the surge of adrenaline rush through him. This was it. It was no longer just a prank. They were about to ignite a revolution of sorts. The entire neighborhood had been living under the shadow of the HOA's control for too long. And now, Grandpa had a plan to take back their rights. Just as Sam was about to ask how they'd get started, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his smile fading as he saw the message. "We are aware of your actions. You have until noon tomorrow to pay for the damages or face serious legal action. You have been warned." Sam's heart sank. The HOA wasn't backing down. In fact, they were already retaliating. Grandpa saw the look on his face and raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Sam showed him the message, his hand shaking. "They're threatening us. Legal action, Grandpa. They want us to pay for the damage or face consequences." Grandpa read the message and then let out a deep, amused chuckle. Well, looks like they're getting serious. But that's just the start. Let them threaten us. It'll only make things more interesting. Sam's eyes widened. "Interesting. Grandpa, they're serious. We could lose everything." Grandpa smiled, a glint of mischief still in his eyes. "Oh, we won't lose anything, Sam. This is exactly what we want." Sam stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "We'll play their game," Grandpa said, his voice suddenly calm and commanding. "But we'll do it on our terms. Let them send their lawyers. We'll give them a fight they'll never forget." Sam felt a rush of excitement mixed with fear. Grandpa was right. This was just the beginning. And whatever happened next, they would face it together. The days that followed the HOA's threat were filled with tension, but also an undeniable sense of purpose. Sam could see the wheels turning in Grandpa's mind, his every move calculated and deliberate. Grandpa had a plan. Sam was sure of it. But what it was, he couldn't quite figure out yet. All he knew was that they weren't backing down. The day after receiving the threatening message, Grandpa had called an impromptu meeting with the neighbors. The backyard was full of people Sam had known all his life, but had never realized just how much they resented the HOA until now. They'd been waiting for someone to take a stand, and Grandpa had unwittingly become their leader. Grandpa's voice rang out over the crowd as he outlined the plan. "We have a chance here to send a message to the HOA. We're not going to roll over. We're going to stand up and fight for our homes, our rights, and our freedom. But we can't do it alone. We need all of you." Sam stood in the background, his eyes flicking from one neighbor to another. Some were nervous, unsure if they were truly ready for this fight. But as Grandpa spoke, a shift began to take place. What started as hesitant murmurs grew into quiet nods of agreement. People started to see what was at stake, and soon the room buzzed with excitement. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about taking back control, about showing the HOA that they couldn't just trample over people's lives. Sam could feel the energy building, the anticipation of what was to come. Grandpa had started something, and now it was a movement. "We'll start with a petition," Grandpa continued. "We'll gather signatures from everyone who's tired of the HOA's overreach. We'll bring it to court if we have to, but we'll make sure everyone knows who's standing in our way." The crowd erupted into applause, and Sam couldn't help but smile. He had never seen his neighbors so fired up. He was beginning to realize that Grandpa's plan wasn't just about taking down the HOA. It was about empowering people to take control of their own lives. Just as the meeting was wrapping up, Sam's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the HOA. It was a local news outlet. The headline read, "Local Neighborhood Takes Stand Against Overbearing HOA." Sam's heart skipped a beat as he opened the message. The news station had caught wind of the events that had transpired, of the prank, the HOA's threats, and now the rising movement in the neighborhood. The story was already gaining traction online. The HOA's image, once solid and unshakable, was beginning to crack. Grandpa grinned when he saw the message. "See, it's working." Before Sam could respond, a car pulled up to the front of the house. It was an official-looking black sedan, and Sam recognized it instantly. It was the HOA's lawyer. The air went still. "All right, here we go," Grandpa said, his tone unbothered. Time for the final act. Sam felt a knot form in his stomach. This was it. The final confrontation. The lawyer stepped out of the car, adjusting his tie, looking every bit the part of a man ready for battle. He walked up the driveway with the confidence of someone who believed they were about to win. Grandpa didn't budge. He stood at the edge of the porch, his arms folded across his chest, waiting. The lawyer reached the steps and gave a tight professional smile. "Mr. Timmons, I presume," he said, addressing Grandpa. "That's me," Grandpa replied, unfazed. "I'm here on behalf of the HOA. You've received our letter, I assume?" The lawyer asked, holding up a thick packet of papers. "I've read it," Grandpa said simply, his gaze unwavering. The lawyer's smile faltered slightly, but he pushed forward. "We've come to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions. The HOA is prepared to take legal action unless you pay for the damages and cease all further interference." Grandpa nodded slowly. "And what if I don't?" The lawyer's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll take you to court. We'll make sure you and your neighbors are financially responsible for all of this, and more." Grandpa didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning to Sam, and the neighbors gathered in the yard behind him. "This is what we're going to do," Grandpa said, his voice strong and steady. "We're not paying, but we are organizing. We've got a petition ready to go. We've got the media on our side. And more importantly, we've got the people." The lawyer's confident demeanor faltered. He had clearly not expected this level of resistance. "You think you can win against the HOA, against the power we have?" Grandpa smiled. "Not only will we win, we're going to make sure you'll think twice before you try to bully anyone again." The lawyer hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. But then, as if on cue, Sam's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a news outlet, it was a notification from the HOA's website. HOA manager resigns amid controversy following local uproar. Sam's heart raced. They had won. The lawyer turned, his face paling as he read the notification over Sam's shoulder. The HOA manager, the very man who had tried to intimidate them, had been forced to resign. The power dynamic had shifted. The battle was over, and Grandpa had won. The lawyer straightened up, took a deep breath, and turned to Grandpa. "This isn't over, but for now, I'll report back." Grandpa gave him a sly grin. "Go ahead. Let's see who gets the last word." As the lawyer walked back to his car, the neighborhood erupted into cheers. They had done it. Together, they had stood up to the HOA, and the system had cracked. Grandpa clapped Sam on the shoulder, his grin widening. "That's how it's done, kid. Sometimes, it takes a little chaos to make change." And as the sun began to set over the neighborhood, Sam realized that it wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about something bigger, a victory for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the system. The HOA might have thought they could control everything, but now they knew better.